Well, you can't trust County.
Well, we have a very different case that we are going to get into on Creep Time today. One that I don't think we always kind of dive into this style. We have a few times in the past to remember certain cases similar to maybe Michelle Von Emster, but I would actually maybe even say Dylan Parker is somewhat similar to this one.
Ooh,
Does that
okay.
give you a vibe immediately?
Yeah. Well, with
Hmm.
Michelle Von Emster, I always feel
It's a
like it's
cycle
like
outside.
it's what is it?
It's a cycle outside.
A sackle.
A
I
cycle.
I always think of like her. I have this like imagery of her walking alone on a beach and then like all of
At
that going
night.
down. Yeah, at
Hmm.
night. Ugh,
That's a
creepy.
very eerie one. And the aftermath is just as eerie, I would say, because of the strange man who showed up at her place of work to make photocopies of her autopsy.
So I
Skip
forgot
over
about
that.
that
Go back,
part.
yeah, go back and listen to that episode if
Yeah.
you haven't already, creepers. But for today's case, I'm first going to give credit where credit is due because this is a creeper suggestion. And I'm excited that we're going to be able to get into it because I wasn't sure if it was going to have to be postponed or wait until after tour, but this is the perfect time to do it. So this is from, let's see, Rebel Jardod. Rebel Jardod on Reddit. Rebel Jardod, baby. So let me just give you a quick overview for you and the creepers about what exactly we're going to get into today because it is very detail dense. So in 2014, it's actually quite old at this point. We're going to go back more than 10
Mhm.
years. There is a discovery that is made of a young man who is found with a gunshot wound to his head. It's a tragic sight, and it very quickly spiraled into what looked like an obvious suicide investigation. But after a shockingly slim investigation window, specifically a 45-minute intake from county police in this area, the scene is effectively closed, the body is removed, and the family is left in agony and with a lot of questions. But something about this did not sit right. There were a number of details in this case that would later emerge, and some evidence that was found when the examining team that was hired by the family, as well as the legal team that was hired, privately looked into this, and they say this is suggestive of murder.
Mm.
So today, you and I and the creepers are going to break down the complete and cohesive timeline of the discovery, all of the evidence that is found, and unpack a little bit of the mystery about what could have been behind the death of 21-year-old Christian Andreacchio.
Mm.
Initial thoughts just before we take any steps further.
Ugh, well, I mean, yesterday we filmed or we recorded Amy Allwine. It's like the same kind of like the back to back of like it looks
That's what
like
I
a
said
suicide
during
when
the
you come
episode.
in.
I was
Yeah.
like, it's
And
so
then
eerie. I was like, the parallels are insane.
oh my God. Yeah, that really breaks my heart because he's young. He's 21, you said?
He was 21 at the time, and this is in Meridian, Mississippi. This took place.
Oh my God. I mean, yeah, that's my initial reaction is just like how tragic for somebody so young and for parents to find their kid is like awful. But then to
Well, that's the
think
other thing as
it gets
well. I should
worse.
clarify. I thought the same thing that you thought, where I was like, because the way the top line is presented for this, and maybe the way that I presented it, is that the parents are left in agony. So we assume that they are the initial people to have found him. They are not.
Oh,
And
okay.
that's where a lot of the suspicion comes from because Christian actually lived on his own. And I am putting cart before the horse, but he lived on his own and he lived with one male roommate, which I had read was his brother, but actually it's sounding more and more like it was his friend Dylan, who we'll get into. And
Mhm.
he lived with his girlfriend, Whitley, a 17-year-old. So technically, Dylan and Whitley are the first two to find the body. And then we
Mm.
unpack a whole host of evidence that does not make sense. And I'm going to preface, I will try to stay. I'm already like going to go back on my word about this, but I'm like, I'm going to try to stay
Neutral.
neutral. But this case pisses me off. And I'm sure it will piss off the creepers who listen to it. And I'm sure the creeper who suggested it. But it pisses me off because when we're discussing these things, when we're going to talk about the evidence that the private eye found, the legal team found, these are not gray area things. Like these are not ambiguous things. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like there are certain things where I'm like, well, he didn't do that. If he shot himself in the head, he didn't do that. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Baby, it's easy
So
to do. It's easy to do when you got the fire of
The
County
fire of Christ under
Correction
my
or
ass right now,
yeah.
bitch. What time is it? I'll say 5 minutes in.
7:56.
So, with all that said, before we're going to dive into anything, welcome back to all of the creepers. Welcome back to another episode with Silas and Stu. We are your hosts every single Friday for a brand new episode of Creep Time. Please make sure to stick around. If you're brand new here, you can follow or subscribe to the show, whether you listen on Apple or Spotify. And if you're on either of those, you can also leave us a positive review because, as Stu and I always say, that helps us immensely. So thank you so much for those who do leave us positive reviews and help to spread the show.
Yes, emphasis on the positive. That's what. Although it is nice to be humbled occasionally, but yeah, no, seriously.
Says you. It's like,
Baby, sometimes we need it. It's a little, little
I,
equilibrium.
I
but-
have been through enough
I know
in this
that
industry.
mustache has gone.
This mustache is a fortress before me to get me through the week and the year. But anyway, thank you again for stopping by. If you want to watch the show, we now have video episodes that are completely available on Spotify, and for a limited time, they are ad-free. So thank you so much for those who follow, subscribe, turn on the bell notification if you don't want to miss new episodes. And please, please consider, if you have not already, bring somebody into Creep Time. You can tell a friend, a family member, a coworker, or even just write about us online. That does so much to get these episodes and these stories out to more people. It helps to grow the show. And of course, we have to mention this because this episode is going to come out before we go on the road. Consider coming to see us live. Creep Time, the podcast, is coming to a city near you on our Western tour, and you can go to creeptime.com to get your tickets before the shows.
Oh my goodness, I can't
Very
believe.
close.
Yes, I think this episode will come out like very close to when we're.
Probably, yeah, in February, yeah,
yeah.
I think.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm super excited. We're both really excited. It's going to be a really fun month to be on the road and see some cities we've never been in and get to meet all of you guys. So if you want to come see all of the spook, all of the eerie in person, again, creeptime.com. Get your tickets ahead of time. We will see you on tour in March.
We're so excited.
But with that, it is time to get into our backstory. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so I struggled a bit with, I was like, how do I approach this? I was like, how much backstory do I give and how much are we going to like sink into the timeline? Because timeline here is especially deserving of our scrutiny, I would say. But I will give you a little bit of setup of Christian, who we knew him to be. So Christian, where was he from? He was actually born on, I believe, November 4th, 1992. And for the most part, I read that he grew up in Meridian, Mississippi. Maybe he bounced around a little bit, but Mississippi was his home base, right?
Mm-hmm.
And from some of the interviews that I watched and things that I read, specifically stuff from his family, he was described as fun-loving. He was very social and he was pretty driven. And I actually believe, from all of the context clues, that he might have been very secure in his path. I was trying to think of a better way to say that, but the reason being is because Christian had a sense of like grounding to him from a very early age of like what he wanted to do, how he was going to do it. And that sort of translated when he turned 18 into him becoming, or going on a track to become, one of the youngest towboat captains in all of Mississippi.
Oh,
He started
wow.
this when he was 18 years old.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, he absolutely loved it too, from what was described. And, you know, from the mentions of the family saying that he was kind and he had a very social nature about him, it was interesting when I was sort of scrutinizing this case and a bit of his backstory to color a bit of this mysterious relationship in his life. Not that it was mysterious from the get-go, but I have my own personal questions about it.
Okay.
So if we roll around a little bit to 2014, which is actually going to be the year of his very mysterious death, we do know that Christian, like I said, was living in an apartment on his own. He was not with his parents. Like I said, I was fairly sure I read that he lived with his brother, and maybe he did for a certain period of time, but it is sounding more and more like he was living with his friend Dylan. So I'll have to go back and double check that one. But he did have several brothers, and I believe he had one sister, so I read in his obituary.
Mm.
But in addition to whoever his male roommate was, albeit brother or friend Dylan, he also had that live-in girlfriend I talked about. So you can probably see on the first page just Christian, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you scroll down to the second, you're going to see a number of other people who were introduced in this story, one of whom is Whitley, the 17-year-old girlfriend. So before I press on any further, just now that you're getting a glimpse of both Christian and some of the people in his life, do you have any initial instincts or thoughts about what you're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, well, first, when you told me he wanted to be a towboat captain, I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, to kind of like make that decision at 18. First of all, it's also like very smart because I think being a captain is really hard work, but I think the earlier you start, I think that's pretty common. Like you kind of just start you know, trying to really work your way up in that field from like you don't really go off to college for it. I mean, I guess you can, but just from like
He
I
started
do know
straight
some
from right
people.
out of high school.
Yeah, like, I do know some people that, like, work on boats and kind of are in that, like, world, so when you mentioned that he kinda knew exactly what he wanted to do, I just thought that was it's key for me because I think at that age, normally, a lot of kids are like, "I don't know, I'll figure it out later," so
Right, right.
that's an interesting, nugget about his personality. I also kinda feel like I just because I'm from the South and from a coastal town, I feel like I'm kind of already dialing in on just kinda like how rural and, kinda I don't know how small Meridian is, but I kinda feel like I, like, know these people a little bit already, just looking at the pictures of everybody, but, um,
There's certainly yeah,
yeah.
you certainly get a sense of, like, what maybe this circle was like, and I will end up playing a 911 call, actually, so you're actually gonna get to hear some people who are involved in this, and I think you'll
Okay.
get a greater sense of sort of who they were. Sorry, Mel's calling.
Oh,
I'm
answer it, baby, the
I'm not
micro bangs are
answering
calling.
nothing. No, that's what I immediately thought of, sorry. Let me just hang up on her and just text her and say, "Girl, we're recording, enough is enough."
Hop on camera so we can get you for 2 seconds for the creepers, and then you gotta hop off.
I'm gonna say, "We're recording, stop." It's so rude. Okay, so I agree with you, though. I think that it struck me because, again, he doesn't do that thing that a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds do where they're sort of lost or guessing and unsure about which direction in their life they wanna take. He just knew from the get-go that he wanted to do this, he was gonna make it happen, and what we would learn is that he was pretty good for the money he was earning. He was kind of supportive, both financially and emotionally of some of the people around him in his
Mm,
circle, even at 21.
wow.
So with that said, I'm gonna keep pressing on so we can actually talk a little bit about the suspicious circumstances around the day that he died. So, oh, and also I should say, for context for the creepers, since Stu is looking at these visuals, if you want to look at them, we are going to have them up on our subreddit. If you go to Reddit, CreepTime the podcast, you will see all of the visuals for every case that we cover. So let's maybe talk a little bit about Whitley Goodman, just since you
Mhm.
got a glimpse of her.
I'm very interested in her story.
Well, the first picture I saw of her, for context for creepers who aren't watching this or looking at pictures of her, she's a young blonde white girl, I believe, with dreads. So I already got an image where I was like, all right, this is a type of young white girl.
Yeah.
And she's 17 years old at the time. And she had been living with Christian for quite some time, not only in this apartment, but it sounded like she was living with him even before this when he lived with his parents.
Oh,
She was
wow.
just, yeah, she was described to have come from a very unstable home and upbringing, although I could not find further details on that. It's not fully clear. It sounds like she was either kicked out as a young teenager or she left on her own.
Mm,
And then Christian's parents, knowing that she was his girlfriend, took her in for a period of time. But unstable was the word the parents have continued to use. So I do want to talk a little bit about how her relationship to Christian is important in the 48 hours before Christian's body is found. So 2 days before Christian's death, friend Dylan Swearingen, which I believe if you're on the second page, he is on the bottom left. Am I correct?
mhm, yes.
Yes, Dylan. Dylan had received a call, I believe. Or no, maybe Dylan had given a call. That's what it was. Dylan had given a call to Christian saying that Whitley had been seen around town driving Christian's car. It was a BMW, which he had left back home because Christian was traveling for work. He was out of state. So this is February 25th. Christian gets permission from his captain to leave the boat early. He's all the way down in New Orleans. And according to a backup from the family and also from what I read from the coworkers, this was totally approved and they knew that he was leaving and it was for a specific reason having to do with Whitley and something going on up in Mississippi. So he's planning to head back home to Mississippi and from everything I pieced together, it sounded like the game plan was that he was going to kick Whitley out of the apartment and end the
Mm.
relationship.
Oh, damn.
there is more to color this as well. So he receives that news, right, from Dylan that Whitley's been seen around town. She's been doing some stuff. She's driving his BMW. And this was a little interesting, but he had initially called one friend and asked for a ride. He needed like a ride up early to get up to Mississippi. Ended up having Dylan come down and pick him up instead. So Dylan is actually going to be the one who is going to transport Christian, and he will be the one who remains with him and Whitley on the day that Christian dies, which is why he's important to the story.
Okay.
So something else to mention about Whitley. There are these allegations that she was being reckless, she was taking his car, but there are also allegations that I found that Christian may have had some knowledge that she was seeing another guy
I
behind his
knew
back.
that's where this was going.
Mhm. Whitley had also been doing something very strange, and this is confirmed. She had been probing Christian in either the days or weeks prior to his death about his life insurance policy through work. Something that was a little bizarre, but she would consistently bring up this hypothetical scenario where she's like, if I got pregnant, and I was going to have our baby and you died or something or fell off a boat, how would we be taken care of? Are we your beneficiary
hmm
for her and this hypothetical baby?
hmm
Mind you, again, she's 17, he's 21 at the time. That's an unusual conversation to have, to be inquiring about whether or not you're the beneficiary on Christian's life insurance.
Right.
Wait, test? Okay, sorry.
Test? Oh, yeah.
I keep looking at
Testing?
the audio interface and I was like, it wasn't like blinking, so I was like, is it recording?
Oh, no. Oh, no,
But
baby.
yeah,
I can
isn't
hear
that
you.
strange though about Whitley?
It's, I really don't want to like already start to, put her, like paint her into a corner or whatever.
Mhm.
What am I trying to say? Put her in a
In
box,
a
but
box, yeah.
she is already kind of striking me as the type that's just like kind of opportunistic, kind of leeching onto someone that she knows has a lot of money that maybe she doesn't have access to and might be playing the card of like, I need you, I need you. But then when
Mhm.
he's gone, it's like a free for all is the vibe I'm getting. And I'm sorry
Yeah.
if that sounds really harsh, but that's how this feels right now. It feels like she's taking advantage of him.
It definitely does feel like she's taking advantage of him, and I think that someone like Whitley could be a symptom of a circumstance of coming from a bit of a broken home,
hmm
where you realize from a young age that you can't depend on the very people that everyone around you says you're supposed to depend on, which are your parents. So you do become a bit opportunistic is a word, but also scrappy, I guess is a word, in a way
hmm
to make sure that your ass is going to be covered at all times.
Yeah, I also think it's just like kind of a greater sign of immaturity. I think it's also like I think she's trying to play into this idea that they're like in a household together,
Mhm.
real adults. And she's 17 years old. She's kind of like playing house at this point.
A
It's
little bit.
not
And
real.
also Christian's not wealthy by any means. I mean, he's working and bringing in like a good amount of income, but they're still in a position where they're in a condo or an
Yeah.
apartment and
Yeah.
they need a roommate. So I don't exactly know what Whitley was doing for work. I mean, she was 17, so for all I know, she was still in high school, but it seemed odd to me that she was inquiring because I guess, and again, I can't confirm whether or not this was true, but I did read this that she was mostly upset because a former girlfriend of Christian's was still listed as his beneficiary for life insurance just automatically from when he first started working
Oh my
on the
lord.
towboat.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I can't believe he like had a life insurance policy like that early
No,
on
well,
in life and
most companies will just provide it. A
yeah.
lot of companies will just like have like automatically provide you life insurance, and I think you just have to list like your beneficiary.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, my
Yeah,
former company
yeah,
did.
I'm like, I think I actually have a
I was gonna say, I was
policy.
like,
I
most
definitely have a
companies.
policy. I just don't know who my beneficiary is or if I've ever listed somebody. That's really stupid of me to
Well,
say, but I don't think I
that's
have.
the next of kin conversation we were having
That's
yesterday.
right. That's right. That's right, baby.
Spouse first, children second.
Yeah.
So now that we've got this dynamic between Whitley, Christian, 17, 21, she's asking about life insurance. We roll around to February 26th, and here is what we know. Christian's friend Dylan, and again, the contradicting statements, but I am 99% sure it was Dylan who ended up picking Christian up in his car down in New Orleans, and he was driving him back up to Meridian, Mississippi. What we would learn is that by the time Dylan and Christian get back to that apartment, Dylan stays in there with him. Christian goes inside. This would be the last time he would ever be around. He
Mm.
walks in and he never comes out.
Oh my
So
god.
something happened in that apartment on this day. So just 6 hours after their initial arrival to the apartment, in a heat of contention between him, the girlfriend Whitley, possibly Dylan, if Dylan was involved in some way, we know that Christian is found dead. So if we start this whole timeline, we backtrack a little bit, and we're actually going to talk about where the witness statements start. We know that Christian gets the ride at 8 a.m. He is picked up by Dylan in the car, and they are driving up to Meridian, Mississippi. Not a lot of context about what the conversation was in the car going up there, but we know they arrive by 11:30 that morning. The pair walk into Christian's apartment. Whitley is there waiting. After Christian and Whitley begin arguing shortly after the arrival, the trio ends up watching a movie. So says Dylan, and so says Whitley after the fact. So they watch a movie, but then Dylan says that Christian asked him to run out to the bank, local bank, and withdraw all of the money in Christian's account and then pick up some lunch for the group.
Mhm.
You'll probably see, is there a security picture of
Mhm.
Dylan on the second
Yeah.
page?
Yeah, you can see
Yeah,
him creepers, like, at the he's talking to the teller and, like, has his phone out, like he's looking something up or maybe texting or something.
it's very interesting. It's a very confusing task. Anytime somebody in any context withdraws all of the money from their bank account, I'm like, that's red flag territory. But specifically, I do not think most people ask other people, their friends, to go to a bank and try to withdraw money for them.
Of course.
Makes no sense to me.
No.
And it just felt like something extreme might be happening here. Either Christian is going off or something has already happened in that house. We do have footage, like I said, you can see this creepers to back this up. So Dylan did leave. He is seen on camera at 12:30 out of the house. That's when he's trying to withdraw the money, and very obviously, Dylan cannot withdraw that money.
Right.
Because like it's so silly, but of course, because he has no ID. He's not like listed as I don't know, an admin on the bank account for Christian. So he gets turned away, right? And ends up picking up the lunch, like he said. We're all still going on Dylan's timeline. Once back, Dylan claims that he got back to the apartment and the three watched another movie on the couch before Christian and Whitley allegedly went out for a drive. Dylan is also going to head out around this time as well. He's going to grab something, I believe, for himself or for the apartment. So he heads out and says he was going to pick up some sort of a speaker from Best Buy. No idea why. But we do know this is something that he did do. He did go out. Something interesting that happened here is that Christian, according to Dylan, before Christian left, asked Dylan where he had hidden his gun.
What?
For context on that, according to a report that I saw from Dylan, Christian had had an episode previously, which almost nobody knew about, and the only people who could corroborate it were Dylan and Whitley, where Christian had held his gun, his own personal pistol, up to his head, either in a fit of rage or suicidal ideations or whatever it might have been, prompting Dylan at a previous date to hide the gun somewhere in the apartment. Before Christian and Whitley left, and before Dylan left, Christian asked him to retrieve the gun, which Dylan says he did. This will come into play, and the reason this will come into play a little bit later is because we would learn that Dylan has gun residue found on
Mhm.
his hands,
Okay.
as does Whitley.
Oh, wow.
hmm
Okay.
So, what happens next? Dylan says he leaves, goes to Best Buy, returns from Best Buy. Looks like Christian and Whitley are already back. He says he comes in, Whitley is asleep on the couch, and he goes upstairs to find a horrifying sight. Christian is found in the apartment bathroom, up the stairs, slumped over the bathtub with a gunshot wound to the head, specifically on his right temple, closer to his ear. And there is a 911 call of this exact moment. I am going to play that for you now.
Oh, man. This is so just just icky. It's so icky that his
You can
own
smell something's up.
of course, yeah, but, like, to think that it's the people that are seemingly the closest to you, your best friends, and, like, if it goes in that direction, which I think it's going, it just is so icky.
We just have a very strange and inconsistent timeline. So I think we're right to scrutinize it and ask questions. And it does feel, for lack of a better phrase, sinister, to be
Yeah, yeah.
honest.
No, it really does.
So this is the exact moment that Dylan says he discovered Christian. So he says. I will preface that.
Okay.
You a suicide? Yes, ma'am. Okay, what's your address? The Woodland Apartment. Woodland Apartments? What apartment number? 801. Apartment 801? Yes, ma'am. You said a BMW. Okay. Alright, who is it, sir? Christian Andreacchio. Chris Andreacchio? Yeah. Okay, and you said he committed suicide? Yes, ma'am. He's laying across the bathroom tub, and he's got blood everywhere. Okay, you said there's blood everywhere. He's across the bathroom? Yes, ma'am. Okay, he's not breathing? No, ma'am. Okay. What's your name? Dylan Swearinger. Swearinger, what was your first name? Dylan. Dylan? Yes, ma'am. Okay, Dylan, stay on the phone with me, okay? Okay. Is your phone number 6?
All right. I cut it off there, but just initial reactions to the call to Dylan.
I'll tell you what I thought was really odd is that he didn't say he shot himself. He said, "There's just blood everywhere, blood all over the bathroom." And it kind of felt like he was stumbling a little bit over, like, what he was gonna say in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, maybe he hadn't listen, if this is as sinister as I think it might be, like, he had not practiced exactly what he was gonna say, and I
Or was
just
choking or
Yeah,
something.
yeah, and it just kinda sounded like 'cause I mean, this is just my personal thought that if I called 911 and I was trying to describe, the scene, I am confident that it's a suicide, I might say something about, it looks like that they've taken their own life by, you know, shooting themselves or something.
To clarify, he does say that at a certain
Does
point.
he?
Yeah, I think I
I
might have cut it off before he actually does say that in the call, because this
Okay.
call, obviously, this is a much longer call, so I just wanted
Yeah.
to give you, like, a snippet of it. So out of context, it might seem strange, but I actually thought it was even more bizarre and maybe more telling that he was immediately leading with saying, "Looks like a gunshot," but I think he says I forget exactly how he words it, and it might have actually been in that clip, and maybe I missed it while I was listening, but he says, "I think he used a gun," which he
Oh,
later,
did
of
he say
course,
that?
it might have been cut out of the clip though that I
Okay,
played,
okay.
but he said something to that effect later in the recording, and I don't know, there was something telling about that and also telling about the immediate jump to suicide, and maybe that's not as strange as I'm making it, but something about the call felt odd to me on first
Yeah.
listen.
Yeah, it felt I mean, of course, you're gonna be panicked and into, like, a kinda state, like, coming in
Mhm.
to see something like that, but he did sound like he was stumbling a little bit, like, over his words and not in a way that was out of, like, like, emotional panic. It felt like trying to say the right thing
Mhm.
is what
Like
I
trying to feed the right information.
yeah, is what my, like, first thought was.
I take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Truthfully, I mean, the call definitely sits as odd to me, but I also have my own bias because I've gone through the whole plethora of information of what's come out about this case, but it's difficult to say. I feel like I'm probably not a good reader as much as I thought of, like, whether or not a 911 call is telling of whether or not somebody's guilty or not, because
Mhm.
people are in such heightened emotional states that I'm like, I don't know how anybody acts in these situations,
Yeah.
you know?
Well, God, I mean, yeah, we've looked at so many 911 calls and every single time, I mean, they can all have different outcomes, but yeah, there was something off about his initial response. I just felt that.
You can also hear Whitley in the background. I'm not sure if you
Yeah,
caught that, but
I
it's only
did.
towards the end of the recording.
Mhm. Just like the higher
Yeah, she's sort
pitch
of wailing
screaming.
in the background, screaming,
Yeah.
and I think I cut this part of the call out, but the operator does say something, which again, this operator pissed me off too. All operators piss me off. The operator says something because she says, "Who is that in the background?" He says her name is Whitley, gives her full name, and then the operator immediately clicks in and is like, "Don't let her touch him." If that's what she's doing, because she's assuming if she's in agony and she's screaming, she might be trying to, like, hold the body or resuscitate. She says, "If it's a suicide and you're sure he's not breathing, get out of the house."
Yeah.
They say that later in the recording.
Oh, God.
So with that, Um, the important thing, I guess, to take away, as many have guessed, is that Whitley, of course, is in the home, but, according to the story, the official timeline that Dylan gives, she was napping, so she never heard the gunshot. He walked in and Whitley was asleep on the couch, and it was only after Dylan goes upstairs and makes the discovery that he wakes Whitley up.
Okay.
So, what we know is that police do come to the residence and a sweep is conducted. It lasted for exactly 45 minutes, where they say in their report that they processed the scene and they pronounced Christian's death a suicide right then and there. But there was much more to this that might tell us a very different story. So, we have a scenario where Christian apparently asked Dylan, if we could just recap Dylan's timeline. He asked Dylan for his gun. Christian says, "Where's my gun?" Dylan says he gives it. And then Dylan leaves. Christian and Whitley, I guess, are left in the house or had come back to the house, and Whitley falls asleep on the couch. Dylan comes back, discovers the suicide. Now, I had questions about this when I was first reading it because I noticed some inconsistencies in the initial statements that I saw from Whitley, where Whitley had initially said something to the effect where she was like, "I was the one who discovered Christian,"
Uh-oh.
which
Yeah.
is in a direct contradiction to what Dylan has been leading with, because I do think they were interviewed separately. And only after this was initially ruled a suicide, and then like they were allowed to conference and talk, and then they were maybe called in for additional questioning, did their stories then suddenly somehow align.
Mm.
But this goes beyond even just the initial police intake. This was something Whitley had actually allegedly slipped up and said to someone else, where she was like, "I was the one who found Christian."
Okay.
And then Dylan came home.
Oh,
So a little
yikes.
bit of inconsistency. But I'm going to actually draw attention to the scene itself, and maybe we can unpack that just a little bit. So this is going to be a tough scroll, but this is going to be the time that I'm going to ask you to go down to the third page where you will actually see the crime scene and Christian's body.
Oh, God. Oh, man. Creepers, if you look at this, just know it is pretty graphic. Oh, jeez.
You'll see on the upper right, for anyone who's not looking at this, that it is an actual shot from the scene of Christian's body and his positioning over the tub in the bathroom. And if I could describe it in a very simple term, he is facing towards the bathtub on his knees outside of the bath. His upper torso and head are hunched over, leaning into the bathtub. Would you
Yeah.
say that's probably an accurate way to
Yeah.
describe
I
it?
mean, it looks like like fell over into the bathtub
Mhm.
almost after pulled the trigger, if he did.
Here's where it gets strange. What we have on the body is a gunshot wound to the right temple, right? Just by the ear.
Hmm.
However, the gun itself is not found on the right hand side of the body. It is not found in his right hand. It's actually not even found in his left hand, actually. The gun, if you'll notice those two little circles that I have,
Uh-huh.
one's bigger, one's smaller, they're red.
Yes.
The small one is the side where the gunshot wound was found. The bigger circle is where the gun itself was found. It was wedged between his body and the tub he was hunched over on his left hand side.
I don't wanna jump ahead. I just have to
Please.
say, creepers, when you see this picture, I mean, the body looks very positioned to me. It looks just
It's a very unnatural
it's
way.
very unnatural, like, and I'm even talking about the frickin' if the reenactment that's kind of in the bottom left corner with the feet crossed. It's it just it's really hard to imagine somebody falling and landing just like this.
It does look quite posed, but I mean, specifically beyond the strange position of the body, which I'm sure could be argued away for a number of different reasons for how people collapse once they have a gunshot wound to the head, the positioning of the gun was really the focal point of that conversation, because the independent examiners who looked at this, they immediately deemed this impossible. There is just no way to work out how somebody who presumably shot themselves in the right temple somehow transfers a gun while they're collapsing to the left-hand side of the body, and it is perfectly wedged between them and, like, the lip of the tub,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Additionally, outside examiners took a look a little bit closer at a few other details that disturbed them about this scene. So, examiners wanted to look at the bullet itself, and I do have another picture of this, and one of the first things they noticed is that there is drywall residue on the bullet, indicating that at some point it had hit a wall. Maybe it passed through Christian and then hit the wall. on his left, right? Because he's
Mhm.
facing the tub. Not exactly what was found at the scene. Because curiously enough, there is a bullet hole or a bullet impact in the wall, and it is photographed at the scene in the background of a picture. It is behind Christian. So if Christian is leaned over the tub and he has a bullet hole to his right temple, how is the marking in the wall behind him, is the question.
Well, I guess my first thought was somebody shot and missed, potentially?
If there could have been, well, or he was shot in a different position. Either or, I think, could be true.
Yeah.
If he was shot in a different position, because what we would also learn is that there is evidence that blood was cleaned up from the scene before officers arrived.
Well, can I just say that because I think it ties into that. I mean, the
Mhm.
other thing I keep thinking is how kinda convenient for his head to be over in a bathtub, if that's where most of the blood was gonna be coming out of, and it's going straight into the bathtub for somebody to have to clean that scene. I mean,
Agreed.
it's very
It's a way to
odd.
contain a lot of the blood loss and
Yeah.
the source of where it's coming from for sure if
Mhm.
he's hunched over into a tub. Absolutely.
Yes.
But also, I gotta say, I mean, because this was so quickly ruled a suicide, this case never and crime scene never really got its due diligence when it comes to like a forensic sweep, like a proper examination of blood splatter. Because that can also tell you a big story about where somebody was shot, based on the splatter that's on a wall. Once the scene was processed as a suicide and his body was removed, it was an unsecured environment.
Mm.
Anybody was allowed to go in, specifically the two other people who lived there. So we have more here. There is another oddity in this examination that actually roots back to, I think, the second examination of the autopsy photos. There is evidence that could suggest that Christian had been dead for a very long period of time prior to this alleged discovery by Dylan. Christian was found in full rigor mortis, according to Dr. Arden, who personally reviewed this case and the autopsy for the family. And Dr. Arden also wanted to call attention to a very damning inconsistency. You're going to see, probably on the third page, a picture of the back of Christian's legs, right?
Mhm.
Do you see that? That was actually taken, I believe, by the coroner at the morgue on the very day that Christian was brought in. He has lividity in the back of his legs. And for anyone who's not familiar with lividity, it is a bluish purple discoloration that occurs after death. It is also known as postmortem lividity or liver mortis. What it means is that after a body is dead, whichever way it's laying on the ground, the blood will pool to that part of the body. So if you're laying on your back, blood is going to pool to the back of your legs. It's going to pool to your back. So that's kind of what we're seeing in that picture. The back of Christian's legs show signs of lividity, except he is not found on his back. His legs are not on the ground. He is on his knees. A direct contrast to how lividity would show up in a body like this if he was originally dead and in that position. Does
Right.
not make sense.
God, this case is so I have such creeps right now. Like,
Because it
seriously.
feels corrupt.
It
It
feels
feels very
so
corrupt.
corrupt. Yeah.
Either
I
poor police work or intentionally poor police work. Either or.
Oh my god. So the thought is whoever did this might have done it, like, the second he got back from his trip or wherever he gets home at, like, 9 AM or what or 8 AM, and then
Well, no, because they left at 8 AM. They
okay.
arrived at 11:30,
Oh,
and then
11:30.
11:30, and then by the time that Dylan is seen on security cameras at the bank, it's 12:30. According to this examiner, based on the lividity, which also does take time to pool and show up like that, and the rigor mortis, they were able to place his time of death possibly sometime just before 12:30, before Dylan went to the bank, which makes complete sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolute sense.
Of course.
Kill your friend or somebody in the house kills him, and then you go to the bank to try to drain his bank account.
Yeah, and, like, the thought was maybe that they had left him lying where the is it lividity? Libidity?
Lividity.
Would have,
Lividity.
like, pooled on the back of the legs, and then when he gets home, they could have positioned the body, and then
Mhm.
that makes it look really weird.
But yeah, I mean, once he returns after 12:30, there's a number of hours that pass because they again said they were all three on the couch watching another movie. No details on what that movie was. And I wish day of they could have each been separated and questioned about which movie it was because I guarantee you they didn't think
They would
ahead
have
of details like that. And that would have
Yeah.
been a little obvious.
Mhm. Mhm.
There is more to this, believe it or not, because you're also going to see in one of those pictures, I believe, a pistol, right?
Mhm.
So this is Christian's gun, right? Registered to him. And granted, I am no expert, obviously, on firearm knowledge, but this is something the private investigative team pulled up because that gun, the way it was found was specific. This is a 45 Kimber semi-automatic, I think 1911 pistol. Something about this pistol that didn't make sense to me is that to be cocked, it has to have like a live round in the cartridge. But the gun was found decocked, which is something
Mm.
that has to be done manually. Something that couldn't have happened if the person who had just used it to fire a round was dead, obviously. So that's what I'm saying when I'm like, there are some things here that are non ambiguous, where if we have someone who allegedly committed suicide using this weapon, using this gun, and the gun is found tucked on the left side of the body and it has been manually decocked, Christian didn't do that. He's dead.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, like that's the irritating part about the conversation where I'm like, I don't know why that's a conversation because to me, that's grounds for an arrest.
Of course.
It makes no sense to me.
Can we also touch on real quick, because I know you mentioned it earlier, but there was something about like a story that had been told about Christian holding a
Hmm.
gun to his head, and that
Yes,
that struck me. I was like, that seems very convenient for all of like, had
absolutely
anybody else
convenient.
heard that story? Like, also Christian seems like he's very I like he is very ambitious and driven and doesn't have much time to like it just that was so weird when you mentioned that earlier. I was
Hmm.
like, okay, convenient that that happened apparently right around the time that this all went down.
It seemed like a seed that was planted, and it also seemed like a setup for why the gun would have been hidden by Dylan and why
Mhm.
Dylan would have had to handle that gun and hand it to Christian that
Yeah.
day, and why he had gun residue on his hands, as
Mhm.
did Whitley. And we'll get into why Whitley had it as well, because her story is a little funny on that and possibly even less believable.
I can't wait to hear her story.
My God. They both piss me off, but Whitley really pisses me off.
Yeah.
So where did I leave off? Yes, the gun story. Nobody else had heard that, by the way. That was purely something that Dylan and Whitley knew, and apparently nobody else had heard. And the parents have been very adamant to say, like, Christian is just not the type to kill himself, which I actually never look at. I just don't think that any family members can make commentary on whether or not somebody wouldn't be the type to kill themselves because there are people who present in all different ways
Yeah.
before they take their lives, and it's very unsuspecting. So I can never look at somebody's pictures and make judgments to be like, that's a person who I would not assume would take their life because it happens to certain
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
But to answer your question, Whitley and Dylan were the only ones who knew that story about the gun to the head. Nobody else had heard of any other suicidal ideations from Christian.
Okay.
There is something else here that I want to mention just before we're going to discuss all of the evidence that I'm laying out for you, but there is something that the private investigative team hired by the family found to suggest even further that Christian's body had been manipulated after his death. According to the family, after the scene had been processed, a private inspection had taken place in the apartment, right? And they found some strange items that were in the same location of where Christian's body was found in that bathroom. A rolled up shirt with blood on it was crumpled up and hidden behind the toilet. There was also allegedly a knife that was found at the scene, which also had blood splatter on it, or possibly blood from a stabbing. Although there are no stab marks that are marked on Christian's autopsy, which, by the way, is also not labeled as a suicide. It is labeled as undetermined.
Oh.
So, what the family did, thinking that they were doing the right thing, is they collected these items and they turned them over to law enforcement. Nobody has heard about them or seen them since 2014. The bloodied shirt found behind the toilet.
I was
So,
just say, how do you explain that? What
with all that said, I'm just saying, like, it's small towns like this where there's a small collective of officers and like a small unit who's maybe looking at a case like this who thinks that like they can control the narrative because it's so isolated to one county.
Yeah.
But that's why talking about a story like this is interesting and compelling and useful because what's a family to do? They eventually run out of money to hire a private eye and a legal team.
Yeah.
And then county police keeps collecting their checks and they bury a story. So, with all that laid out, what is your takeaway just initially before we get into some of the witness statements about what the hell Whitley was up to around this time?
I mean, the thing I'm most curious about is what the hell relationship Dylan and Whitley had to enable them
I thought the
to
same thing.
band together to do this, because clearly if like Whitley's his girlfriend and her allegiance isn't to him, it's somehow to Dylan, I'm immediately thinking to myself, okay, is there a relationship there? Is there something else that like and I think this is why I have such creeps right now, is that they're in such close quarters with each other. And yet
Hmm.
I don't think they woke up one day and said, "Hey, we're going to commit this heinous crime," in order like this in my mind would have had to take a couple of weeks to plan and premeditate. So that is just really interesting to me to think about, like, when those if those conversations took place. Obviously, creepers, I'm, like, already making my mind up about this case,
I
but,
was gonna
like
say, I guess neutrality's out the window, but
I know, out the window, baby. Also about neutrality, and we're talking about county, I am also frustrated because I feel like these cases get diluted and watered down because these are kids, essentially, in a lot of county police mind, like, "Oh, these, these crazy
Mhm.
kids, like, all living in a house together, and one of them's 17, she's some crazy young girl." Like, no, this is very serious, like, this is insane. If they were able to pull this off, like, these are very dangerous people that will grow up to be extremely dangerous people, like,
Absolutely. And
um
the other thing that I was thinking about on the note of county, I kept trying to find, I was like, is there some connection between Dillon to county or Whitley to
yeah,
county? Is somebody related to someone? Because usually that's at the bedrock, I think, of any sort of county corruption or cover up. But in this case, I didn't find anything. And there might be something that the parents know or the investigative team knows because it's a small town. Somebody knows somebody kind of thing
mhm,
is my
mhm.
thinking. But maybe I should color a little bit more of the backstory here about Whitley and maybe what some of the allegations were against her around the time just leading up to Christian's alleged suicide.
Please do. I'm
You're
itching.
like,
I'm itching to hear it.
well, there's quite a bit of secrecy both on Whitley's part and also Dylan. So one of the first indications for Christian's parents, specifically, I believe the father, from what I saw in an interview, that Christian's death was more mysterious than they had initially suspected, is that on the day of the suicide, everybody is down at the police station. The parents are there. They received the worst call of their lives. And Whitley was exhibiting strange behavior at the police station. And one of the first questions the father brought up, Christian's father, who I believe his name is Troy, I think. I'll have to double check on that. He said, "Where is Christian's phone?" And he could get a sense just from Whitley's body language at the station that she was hiding something. So he got very stern and he was like, if somebody has his phone, we're not leaving this room until we get Christian's phone. And just grilled her until, believe it or not, Whitley reaches in her purse and pulls out Christian's phone and hands it over.
Oh my god.
Big question on everybody's mind: what the hell is on that phone that she doesn't want people to see?
Right. I actually questioned, sorry, and I'll let you
Yeah,
press on. I
please. Oh my
questioned
God.
when I first saw that picture of him in the bank where he's
Mhm.
holding up the phone. I was like, "I wonder if that's Christian's phone." And they're, like, trying
I
to
know.
show, like,
It'd be
"No,
so
this is
difficult to
me. I've"
tell, to be
Yeah,
honest.
yeah.
Unless we could use location data, but again, it's so frustrating because this case there's missing information because the case was never given a proper, like, forensic sweep,
Mhm.
like, they're not pulling phone records. This all has to go through a very expensive private eye who has limitations up against law enforcement, and this has even made its way up to the district attorney in Mississippi from
Wow.
what I read, and they also shut it down, and they were like, "We're not investigating this as anything more than a suicide." So it hasn't, like, location data hasn't been probed like that, and also this
Yeah.
was in 2014.
Mhm.
But there is something on that phone, something the private eyes are able to get a hold of, which is his call records. On Christian's call history, on the day he died, there is a number that Christian had called back to back to back a number of times that afternoon. It is a guy in town named Matt Miller. You'll see Matt on the second or third page on the
On the
bottom right,
second
I
page.
believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Matt Miller, who, by the way, I've watched interviews with, he has been very forthright to, like, be open, be interviewed, be scrutinized, and looked at. The big question is, why was he called 4 different times? Mind you, he did not answer these calls. This is a guy in town, similar age, who had allegedly been keeping up with Whitley, and there are allegations the two were sleeping together
Mm.
as recently as the night before Christian's death, actually. So according to some some of this. The partial reason that Christian came up from Mississippi early was to confront Whitley not only about driving his car, but about the allegations regarding Matt Miller and her sleeping together and kick her out, which seemed like much stronger motive if he was
Hmm.
actually planning to kick her out, that he found out some information about that.
Sure.
I'm not sure, I'll say it, if Whitley did actually sleep with Matt Miller, but what we do know is that she was with him the night before. This is corroborated. So, according to witnesses and Matt Miller himself, Miller and another guy named Jet in town were together the night before and they were shooting guns, and Whitley was with them. Now, Miller says that Whitley was mostly with him and was actually sitting on his lap for a period of time, and she was too scared to shoot any of the guns. So she was actually holding her hands over her ears, and then Matt was holding his hands over, which is a very sort of flirty thing, I would assume.
Hmm.
This is all while Jet is shooting. But according to Jet, Whitley did shoot one of the guns the night before, and this was in part how she explained how she had gun residue on her hands the day Christian was found dead. She said, "I was shooting a gun last night, and I haven't washed my hands since the night before." Miller says no. Miller says, "No, I was with her the whole night, quite literally on my lap, and she didn't shoot any gun. She was just with us."
Damn.
So that's, I mean, it's a little unbelievable too, even if she had been shooting the gun, that there would be gun residue still on her hands the following day that were all the way at, like, what has he found, like 6 p.m. or something, and she still hasn't washed her hands once that day or the night before.
I mean, also, can we just call attention to like how suspicious it is that she's like out shooting guns the night before her boyfriend gets shot? Like, I mean, I know we're down the South and like I
I
have,
was I was gonna say it
friends
was
that
like
go and they go
context
out.
dependent. It is Mississippi, but
I know, but like, I mean, that would make me raise my eyebrow if I was an investigator, like, and then to potentially be lying about shooting the gun. It's all weird. It's very odd.
inconsistency in someone's story when it comes to a suicide is always a bad
That's a
sign.
red flag. Yeah.
Always. Um, but actually, to go back to the calls that were found on Christian's phone, I was still wondering, I was like, why was Christian repeatedly calling Miller? Because this all
Mhm.
happened right around like noon as well, I believe. Miller does not believe it was Christian who was trying to call him. He thinks it was actually Whitley using Christian's phone,
Mhm.
trying to repeatedly get in touch with him, but ultimately we'll never know. Was that the thing that Whitley was trying to conceal by hiding the phone and not turning it over to the parents or law enforcement until she was kind of grinded down? So Miller also stepped forward, and I gotta say, Miller has taken some big swings here because he's technically not really all that involved. So I guess he has nothing to lose or gain in this other than just to be honest. But he says that he can corroborate Whitley has changed her story a couple of times because he was the one who remembered that on one occasion, he first heard that Whitley said she heard the gunshot and she ran upstairs, and that's how she discovered Christian. On second pass, she was suddenly napping, and it was Dylan who did it. So even Miller, the local guy who's like kind of in this bizarre love triangle, he's the one who's coming forward and saying like something seems off with these people.
Yeah. Well, and I have to say, I mean, I would believe him because like you said, he has nothing to lose. I mean, and
If he's innocent,
clearly,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, and also I can kind of understand, you know, if he's got this weird kind of flirty relationship going on with this girl, he might also think in his mind, like, wow, she doesn't have respect for. I mean, he's certainly like egging it on, of course, but like in his mind, he's probably thinking, like, well, I guess the relationship wasn't like as solid as I thought if she's, into me too, and we're hanging out together. So I feel like he's also, it's demonstrating to me that he like has a lack of trust in Whitley herself,
Hmm.
you know?
And that maybe it was. I mean, I'm not to say that Miller is without sin just because he's the only person being honest here, but like Miller, he may have thought it was more casual. He may have been fed some information where he didn't know that Whitley was even with Christian. It doesn't seem like that from the familiarity they had with each other. I think maybe Miller was aware that Whitley was probably cheating on Christian with him
Yeah.
if they were sleeping together, which is why I say Miller is not without sin. But just because he's giving a morsel of honesty in a bunch of people who are lying does not sway things one way or the other, is my point.
Yeah, totally.
But I guess with all of that sort of laid out, how does the case sort of rest now? What is the timeline that is being suggested by the opposing side? So if we could reconstruct maybe a proper timeline, because we're not going to believe Dylan's BS about anything with like the story of the gun being held up to the head, and we're looking at this evidence of the lividity, and Christian was maybe dead before 12:30. We've got Dylan at a bank trying to take all of his money out. I'm going to guess there was an explosive argument that took place the second Christian walked through that door at
Yeah.
11:30 that morning. A confrontation that he had been gearing up for the entire ride up from New Orleans to Mississippi. Walked in, confronted Whitley. Maybe Dylan had warned her that they were coming back. He must have, because I mean, he was leaving the house. And then Whitley maybe had the gun herself. That's the big question. Was Whitley the one to fire the gun if this was a homicide, or was it Dylan?
My gut tells me it was Dylan. Um, only because it kind of sounds like from what you were saying with her maybe being at the shooting range the night before and her kind of
Mhm.
being nervous around guns or
I thought so too. Yeah, I thought
like
that was important.
it I mean to go ahead and do that to someone like you got to be ready to fire or like have the confidence in that moment like I'm doing it and I know how to work this thing and I just have a feeling that that was not like Dylan's first time shooting a gun before,
Mhm.
would be my thought, but
I would
I
agree with you.
yeah,
It's
and I
also it takes a bit of skill to, if you are shooting someone, to get them in the head, and mind you,
mhm,
it wasn't as precise as at the temple, it was actually closer to the ear, which is a bit of a strange location for if it was Christian who
yeah,
took his own life.
and Dylan was the keeper of the keys at that point. We don't know what the conversation was that drive up, but he could have been egging him the hell on and pulling information out of him, like, "What do you know about the" he could have really been, "What do you know about Whitley and Matt's relationship?" Like, "Yeah, man, like, it's messed up." Like, I can just see a world where he
Mhm.
already knew this was gonna happen, so he was like, "Let me get Christian, like, really riled up so that when we get in the door, I have, like, my sort of, like, motive, I guess, to
I
make
guess,
this
yeah.
happen."
Well, I guess that is my question around it. Most of it has to, because I'm pretty firm in what I'm seeing that this doesn't look like anything other than a homicide. So the question is, was it Whitley? Was it Dylan? I guess it makes more sense considering Whitley's inexperience with guns that it might have been Dylan. The thing that's lost with me is true motive, because it could have been money, which definitely seems like it was at the forefront of Dylan's mind to get Christian's money. And maybe that was also a conspiracy that Whitley was in on because she was asking about the life insurance weeks before.
Mhm.
So I'm actually leaning closer to what you said, that this might have been a conspiracy setup.
I mean, it certainly feels like that, and I definitely feel like the motive was money here. I also wonder if there was, like, a jealousy factor, and I'm not
Mm.
even talking about, like,
Like Dylan to
Whitley.
Christian.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
kinda wonder if, you know, there was any sort of dynamic where he felt like, "Okay, Christian's, like, got it all together." I don't know what Dylan's background was, but, like,
Not great.
not great, but
Not great.
but I question if he if he was jealous of him and at some point he and Whitley had conversations about because that's an easy way to, like, bond with someone is if their partner is, like, having problems and, like, you also don't like the person or you
Yeah.
have feelings, and then you bond over that. I mean, I could see a
Create the
world where that
common
happened.
enemy.
Yeah.
Well, we're also ruling out the idea only because I think Matt Miller throws the whole suspicion. It throws the scent off about the possibility that Dylan and Whitley could have also been sleeping together.
Well, I thought that too. I
Yeah.
was like, I really wonder, like, what their relationship was like behind those closed doors.
If I had to guess, and this is purely speculation and theory, so none of this is concrete, but I do think that maybe part of this was a conspiracy that they were hoping to stage and they had planned for this day. So maybe Dylan already had the gun on him and he was sort of waiting for the right moment to like get Christian up early for a time that like his family wasn't going to be expecting him to be up and back, back in Mississippi. And maybe he had been egging him on up until the point they got through the door. And when he goes to confront Whitley, maybe Dylan comes right from behind, gun to the head.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then for the remainder of the day, it becomes about Dylan's original plot to go to the bank, get Christian's money, and then the rest of the day is about cleanup and staging.
Mhm.
until they roll around hours and hours and hours later to where Whitley and Dylan are ready to make the 911 call for the discovery in the
Yeah.
evening.
I mean, that's exactly what I think happened. I'm with you, baby.
Then why is county police covering this up? That's my thing. I'm like, what is there, just to not look stupid? I don't get it.
Maybe to not look stupid, but I really do think that sometimes there's something about, like, when young people are in, like, some sort of, like, crazy possible love triangle, and it's just, like, all it becomes, like, fodder in county police eyes, and
To
I know that
justify
sounds
murder?
insane. I know, but I feel like we do see that, though, sometimes where it's like, "Oh, these crazy kids, like, we're not," or these, like, kind of
Like
and I
it's not investigated as thoroughly or something.
yes, and I feel like I can say this because I've seen it and I've grown up around it, but it's like these hicks are like, out here with like guns and going nuts on each other and taking each other's money and it's like
Mhm.
they don't take it as seriously. They don't take it as and like those are the people that turn into criminals like very seriously later on. So,
Well, I mean, to patch that up aftermath-wise, because of course Whitley and Dylan are not gonna be found guilty in any sense. I mean, they're not even there's like literally no heat on them. They've never even been arrested.
that's so
They have
crazy to
never been
me.
arrested in connection to this because it has never been looked at as anything other than a suicide. And I feel for this family so much so because they have truly scraped together and bled their resources, every single dollar they had to get
Mm.
a private investigative team who found the majority of this evidence, to get a legal team who was like, wait, what the hell? Like looking at all of it, and they're like, none of this makes sense. They just keep hitting roadblock after roadblock. So shows like this and podcasts that cover this story are kind of the only outlet that can help keep it top of mind 10 years later, because this is over 10 years old now.
Yeah.
And I feel so much for them because I can't even imagine the agony of one losing your child, but knowing in the back of your mind that there are two people who might be involved who are walking free. They get to
Mhm.
live their lives, they get to start their lives, have families, work jobs. And Whitley and Dylan do not talk to the press. They do not give any interviews. Allegedly, they have nothing to hide, but they don't talk to any press at all.
Can also imagine it's very hard for his parents to kind of look back and think about how much he was kind of financially taking care of her. And I'm sure at times Dylan, and kind of running that apartment and house. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure
like
they look
being the
back.
dad of the house, kind of.
Yeah, I'm sure they look back and they're like, wow, like our son probably got taken. I mean, obviously got taken massive advantage of. And probably have a lot of regret about that, and I hope they don't because it's something like this, I mean, you can never just, like, see it coming,
Mhm.
but I also would just be curious, I don't, like, know if there's been any more information about it or, like, if they've investigated it more, but, like, if we wanna believe that it was really a suicide, like, I
Mhm.
just feel like there would have been more clues about, him kinda getting rid of things, like the kinda typical things that we see before someone takes their own life,
Absolutely.
or, like,
I mean,
telling people I'm
he
sad
would
or
be a statistical anomaly because he is part of the 10% who did not leave a note behind.
yeah, it's very odd. Um, it's funny, when you were talking earlier and you were like, I like, you can't look at the parents and, like, when they say, "Our son would never do this," like and you're
Mhm.
totally right, but my first thought was, "What are the parents gonna say?" Because I feel like it seemed kinda like they were pretty close with him, so I was just curious if they were gonna say, like, he was telling us work was really hard and he was having trouble and, um,
Yeah,
so
any
when they
sort of inclination. I mean, they
yeah,
definitely knew of the strained relationship, I think, with Whitley. They did not like Whitley because they knew somewhat of the financial burden and emotional burden that a girl like her was putting on him. But I can only take what they say with a grain of salt because it's through the lens of grief that they want
yeah,
to remember that he was fun loving, he was social, he was looking forward to life. He would have never done something like this. And there is almost no case or parent situation that I've looked at where they have said anything other than that.
right, right,
There is no parent who says, I thought they were going to kill themselves,
of
usually.
course. Yeah, of course.
So, really, I mean, it sounded also like his friend group was kind of somewhat isolated to just those two. Like, really, most like Dylan was considered his best friend, I think, which is
Well,
such a betrayal if this is on the sinister side of things.
I was gonna say, and I feel like we see, I mean, that's kind of like a classic trope. Like it's the person closest to you that then, turns on you and has been plotting against you. And I also just think it's what's so telling is how close in proximity they all were. The fact that they
Mhm.
lived together, there was so much time when when Christian was away at work that the two of them could have been in cahoots and talking and planning this. Like,
Excellent point. Didn't even
yeah,
think about that, but excellent point.
it's different than if Dylan was just like his buddy that was always around. Like, they were under the same freaking roof.
Mhm.
Uh, and there's automatically, I think, like a camaraderie when you live with people, even if you don't like them. Like, you become your own little like community. And I think
Yeah.
that I'm sure there were conversations that were really just gross and icky that happened behind closed doors while he was gone.
Unfortunately, we might never know
Yeah.
because as this case stands today, it is effectively closed as a suicide. It is, like I said, gone all the way up to the district attorney who will not look at it as anything other than a suicide. And this is where the story stands. And I do not know for the life of me how some of that evidence, which seems irrefutably impossible to explain, could not push this into the other camp of a homicide investigation.
Oh, I'm so angry. This is really terrible, and I don't know where they are today. I don't know if you saw if there's anything about, like, how their lives have progressed, but
Dylan and Whitley,
yeah,
they keep they're still in that part of Mississippi, I should say. I'm pretty sure
interesting.
Whitley does have I forget what kind of a job was it, but she has a job that I did not think she would go into this field. I forget what it was, but
Mm,
Dylan, I mean, they've tried to contact him a number of times. I've watched interviews where they quite literally bombard him at his house. The press are ruthless. They're crazy.
yeah,
And they go straight up to his door. And I'm like, that's a ballsy thing to do in Mississippi. And he's living in some pretty rough means, I would say.
mhm.
So I don't know where their lives kind of shake out. And I don't know if they think about this or think about Christian, but the person who stepped forward and stepped up really in all of it was Matt Miller, the one who was kind of the one to I guess, break some of the silence about what the dynamic was between him and Whitley. We don't know if he's telling the complete truth, but that's pretty damning to
Yeah.
say that she didn't even shoot the gun the night before, and we have no other explanation for the gun residue on her hand.
But do you find, I mean, has your opinion changed at all, or do you think there's more besides the money as the motivation?
If it's not money, it's sex.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah, if it's not money, and it could very well be both. It often is coupled, but I do think that it could have been a conspiracy that was born out of a relationship between Dylan and Whitley that also had to do with Christian's money and life insurance. Because also forgot to mention this in something like the days to weeks after Christian's death, Whitley was at the door. I believe I read of his grandparents asking if they had any information about the life insurance payout. This was like prior to the funeral.
Oh my god. Also, wait, what the hell was their plan after this? Like, if Whitley was gonna be the beneficiary,
Split the
was she
money.
gonna split it with him? Well, how could he trust her? That's where I always with cases like this, I'm just like, "But why people," I'm just gonna say something, people do really stupid shite. Like, because to
I was already
band
looking at the
together,
time because
I
I
know,
was
you're
like,
like
111?
to
111?
band together with somebody that is gonna do something so foul, but I guess at that point, you're both trash, so it doesn't really matter, but
I mean, your moral compass is already, yeah, it's already in
it's
the
screwed.
gutter.
But, yeah,
And they got away with it, is the thing.
I know.
It worked.
This whole case is in the gutter.
The one thing that I almost didn't wanna look up, but I wanted to bookend this with, I was never sure because it's very possible Christian did listen to Whitley in the weeks before and did name her as the beneficiary.
Yeah.
It is very possible she did walk away with his life insurance settlement, and I couldn't find any follow-up on that, but it's entirely possible.
Oh god. Did you see, like, any interviews with the parents or anything
Oh, yeah,
about.
of course,
Oh, really?
of course.
Do they, are they ever, like, probed about Whitley, or is it mostly just, like, keeping it very, about Christian and
Oh, no, they
that's
are
it?
all cards on the table.
Really?
Because they are adamant that this is homicide, and they
Yeah.
believe that Whitley and Dylan conspired to do it solely because their stories have changed, and Whitley has something to hide, apparently.
Yeah. Good. I mean, I hope they keep speaking out about it. I really hope that something changes with this, because this is just,
I do too.
if I were those parents, I mean, this is like tragedy plus living with a lot of anger for the rest of your life. Like oh God, it makes me so ill.
I know.
Mm.
But everything I have shared with you and the creepers today is all that I know about Christian's case. So I want to thank you for listening to his story. I want to thank the creepers for
Yeah.
listening to this and the creeper who suggested it because I had never come across this. I had never heard of it. And it's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
Bizarre story.
What was it? Rebel jargon? What was it?
Rebel Jardod?
Rebel Jardod.
Something
Maybe
like
we're
that.
gonna need you to unpack what the hell that means.
Maybe
Rebel Jardod.
it could. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe it was Jared and I just made it a typo.
I
It
like
could've-
Jardod.
Maybe Jardod's a character that neither of us know.
It's well, you're Rebel Jardod and I'm Competitive Cub.
And there you have it,
And
babies.
there you have it.
Oh, creepers, we are going to catch you guys on another episode, but we want to thank you again for listening to this one. Until then, we're going to say goodbye.
And good luck, y'all.
We'll see you on the next one, guys. Bye.
Bye, creepers.